Robert Billington can record.
I got it. Oh, is it still say me? I'm you?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because we look so much alike.
I know. We're twins. Age-wise and everything else,
Why
we're
not?
identical. Yeah.
We're tall, we're short, we're boys, we're girls.
Oh, it's working.
It is.
So a preacher friend of mine once said, if you don't feel like you've got something that God's given you to share, don't share it. And so that's basically what I'm going to do tonight. But something's been bugging me since a couple of weeks ago. So I'm going to ask you guys, I'm going to give you an assignment, give you a challenge, whatever you want to call it, just for some fun, because you know
He loves fun.
how I love fun and how my brain does really weird things. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the camel in the eye of the needle, right? And, was it a camel or not? Was it a true sewing needle or not? Was it a door? Was it a gate? Was it this? Was it that? And we went through all of that kind of stuff. And if you remember, one of the things that I found online is where down at the bottom of everybody's comments, which were all pretty squirrely anyway, but one of the people said, look, in the Bible, the Greek words camel through the eye of the needle are these three Greek words. So Jesus said A, B, C in Greek, which means A, B, C in English. So I really don't think we should be having a big discussion about that, because Jesus said it, these three Greek words, that's it. Until Bob went, wait a minute, I don't think Jesus spoke in Greek at his preaching. I'm not going to say he couldn't if he wanted to, because that seems a little presumptive, but I don't think he preached in Greek. And so that got my brain going, and I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about this the other night. So I'm going to give you a couple of things, then I'm going to basically say, and I'll let you guys worry about it over the next week or so. And then you can come back and say, Bob, I didn't bother to think about it. Or I looked up some stuff. This is really weird. So one of the problems I have after that thing that we did about the eye of the needle, is I started thinking, and I said, it's interesting. Everybody in my Bible not only speaks English, but they all speak grammatically correct English. Every single one of them. The woman at the well probably never left Samaria in her entire life. Probably wasn't educated. She's a female at the time of, back in Bible times. But she speaks perfect English when she and Jesus have this conversation. When he goes to see Caiaphas, they speak in English, and they both speak very well. I'm going, well, both of them could speak Hebrew, so I'm not sure why they're speaking in English, but okay, they are. Nicodemus speaks in English. Even Pilate, who's a Roman, speaks in English. The soldiers that put the crown of thorn on his head, they all speak in good English. They all ask their questions in nice sentences and plain sentences. All of these people speak really good English in my book. And I got to thinking, well, wait a minute. I'm not sure this makes sense to me. So then I started thinking,
how much need a Greek Bible?
I needed something Bible. I need something. I need a brain. But I don't know how many of you have ever worked through a translator and actually sat and talked to somebody through a translator.
Maybe Mike.
Mike, maybe. Kasum, she speaks 100 languages. She probably didn't have to worry about it.
She was the translator.
That's right, exactly. But I have, in lots of different places where I've done it, for my job, it's a really different way of communicating. And I know Gordon would have preached some in Arabic, but he also preached some in English, because some of the liturgical words in the Church Society in Egypt are different than just talking words that you and I use every day. They say most of us, even in English, only use 2,000 to 3,000 words in a normal day or a normal week. It's a very limited vocabulary. And so church words, and I went to church a couple times with Gordon, and he spoke in English and had a translator. But I've had the thing about translators is that I've been in some situations where I go, good morning. And then somebody says good morning in Russian. And then another person says good morning in Chinese. Then another person says good morning in Korean. And then I go back to say, assume when, after all the translators have had their deal, I go, so this is the agenda for today in Russian, in Chinese, in Korean. And if somebody asks a question, it goes the other way around. It goes to, back to one, back to the other, back to me. And so it leaves a lot of gaps in your time of what you're doing and how you're thinking. The other thing it does is every once in a while I'd ask a question like, well, what do you think about this engineering principle? And the person on the other end would go, blah, 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 blah. And the translator would look at me and goes, he agrees. And you go, okay, I'm glad he agrees, but I'm not sure I got the whole
What is he agreeing on?
And so when you're using translators, there's a lot of clarification that goes on. You ask the same question 3 different ways. And in fact, a friend of mine and I, when we get in these meetings in Azerbaijan, where we're just going into Russian, he'd ask a question and I'll be silly about it. He'd go, so guys, how much do you think 1 + 1 is? It'd get translated and the answer come back 6. And he'd look at me and go, and I go, well, if I had 1 apple and I went and got a second apple, how many apples would I have? 14. We do this about 3 or 4 times, at which point he and I had a code word. I don't remember, it was like applesauce or something, that we'd turn and say to each other very quietly, which was, obviously, we're not getting through. We'll come back to this later. Because it's obvious whether it's the engineering, whether it's lost in translation, whatever it is. So when I start thinking about those situations, and it's like, when you're dealing with other people and you're dealing with different languages and you're dealing through translators, it actually adds stress, but it also adds difficulty in, did I really understand what the other person said or meant? And it takes an extra level of clarification. It takes more time because we're trying to make sure that when we communicate clearly. So this was also true in the synagogues in and around the Middle East, in Israel at the time of Christ. And it's brought up in some of the theological stuffs about Jesus' inaugural address in his hometown, where he takes Isaiah. We've talked about it. He does a couple things and skips over Isaiah and drops out some parts, but uses other parts and kind of pisses off everybody because he leaves out the favorite parts. But in that time frame, when you were preaching out of the prophets, and even if you weren't preaching out of the prophets, the book was in Hebrew. But a significant portion of the congregation didn't speak Hebrew. They spoke Aramaic or Syriac. And so as the person was reading out of the book, they would read a section and then somebody at the side would translate it into a spoken language. Now, we know this is even the case today in Egypt because Egyptian Arabic is a colloquial expression Arabic. It is not formal Arabic. And so if somebody is talking in formal Arabic, whether it's a newspaper or a news program or a legal document or a governmental law, that's all in formal Arabic. And if the guy that's hoeing the row out in the farm wants to understand it, he needs a translator. He needs somebody to translate it from Arabic to Arabic, if you will, but from formal Arabic to Egyptian Arabic colloquial. And so even in Jesus' time, this was happening in the synagogues. Somebody would read Hebrew, somebody would translate it into Aramaic, and in the Mishnah, which is published a couple hundred years, started before Christ and published a couple hundred years afterwards, It even has instructions on how you do that. And part of the instructions are you can start in one place and jump over to another when you're preaching in the prophets and back to here and back over to there while the guy's translating. That's not against the rules. And the second thing is you can agree with the translator that I'm going to read verses 1 through 3, but only translate verses 1 and 2. Because we haven't got that much time and I'm not going to go into all this stuff on all these stuff. So while I'm reading, you don't have to translate everything, just hit the high spots. And so all of that's going on at the time of Christ. Plus, there are a lot of people around that speak in different languages. The easiest example of that I can give you is in Acts chapter 2. If you look up Acts 2 and you go down to verse 8, and I'll go through it real quick. This is Acts 2. So this is when they come out, the tongues of fire, they all start talking. Everybody in Jerusalem who's there for the feast is going, what's going on? Are these guys drunk? We go, no, they're not drunk. But if you start in verse 8, it says, aren't these guys that are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear them in our own language to which we were born? And then it makes a list. Parthians, Medes, Elamites, people of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Ages, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, Libya, Cyrene, visitors from Rome, Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. We all hear them speaking in our own tongues, proclaiming the mighty deeds of God. Now, I didn't count, but there's a good couple hands full of languages there that people are saying, I'm hearing it in my own language. So obviously, God doesn't really have a problem with all these mix of languages that come around from the Tower of Babel. However, everybody's trying to communicate, and everybody's trying to talk to each other, and everybody's trying to get everybody to understand them as they minister to each other. And even in the ones before you get into Acts where Jesus is preaching and teaching in the different regions, we know that we have people from Rome and Latin. We know that we have Greeks from the northern part of Israel. We know that we have Aramaic and Syriac, which are Semitic languages. We know we have Hebrew. We know that we have several local dialects, including in Samaria. And then you got this whole list right here. When there's a feast, all of these languages are in Jerusalem. So maybe not everybody speaks as good English as my book says. And maybe in some of the interactions in biblical times, there were people that were struggling to either hear and understand or to be understood. And if we think about our relationship with God, it says that we will know when we finally get there, we will know as fully as we are known, which says to me, God understands us. We don't necessarily always understand God. And we know that Jesus spoke in parables, he even admitted, so some people might not catch on. We also know he said things to different people, like when he did Nicodemus, you got to be born again. And Nicodemus is like, say, what? I don't think my mother's going to go for that. So the whole language thing, which got triggered by the eye of the needle in me, is like, how did this work? How did the people in Bible times really communicate? How did Jesus interact with people? And obviously he interacted in a way where people felt they were heard. And yet even today, where most of us speak English, we still misunderstand each other because we all come from different places, same language, but we come from different places, both whether it be economically, philosophically, or practically. You know, I grew up in a Billington household. Mary Kay grew up in a Ricardo household. I grew up north. There's a lot of people down here that don't understand us Yankees. Better now than it was in 1974, but it still gets that way. And like my nephews and some people who think the world is flat, obviously there's something I don't understand. So my question to y'all, and if you get interested, go look at some of the stuff and try to figure it out. But to me, it's like maybe there was more challenge than what I understand here in the book at any specific instance, like when Jesus is being beaten and tormented and they put the crown of thorns on his head and they blindfold him and they, people hit him with a stick and say, come on, if you're a prophet, tell me who hit you, kind of stuff. But you're going, wait a minute, those are centurions. They're not from the region, because you don't have the army from the same region as the region, because if you do and you say, hey, Joe, shoot your friend, he doesn't do it, which is why in Russia, if you're in Eastern Russia, you get sent to Moscow or to the West, because then if somebody says shoot him and he's another Russian, you don't have any compunction because he's not your friend. He's not your tribe. He's not somebody you know. So the centurions would have been probably European, probably spoke Latin, but they may have spoken several other different further northwest languages. And yet they were taunting Jesus in what language? And if you responded, what language did he use? And does that interesting mixing of maybe everything in there isn't done in perfect King James English? Maybe that's the complexity of what we read in here. And so I just got thinking about it. I'm still asking me questions. And if I talk to myself, you guys, that's all there is to it. But I think that's something we, when we look at one of these interactions, go, wait a minute, sort of like the woman at the well. She's a Samaritan. She's obviously a woman at that point in time, so she hasn't been to school.
She didn't change.
She didn't change later. She hasn't been to school. What language or dialect would she have been speaking? Jesus was probably speaking Aramaic. He could have spoken Hebrew because he was a good Hebrew boy and he'd been to Hebrew school. He obviously could read in the synagogue, and he's God, so he's like Kasum. He can speak all these languages by himself. But how does the interaction go, and does that make the interaction more interesting if you say, wait a minute, they may have really had to work at understanding each other? And so anyway, I'm just curious. I'll leave that with you guys. I'll let you think about it. It's just more fun.
I didn't grab my Bible, but in verse 8, Bob, maybe read it again about how they heard it in their own language.
So at the end of verse 7, the comment is, aren't all these people who are speaking differently Galileans? So the first the disciples. So the first expectation is they're from Galilee, sort of like they're from Texas, or they're from upstate New York. Why are they saying y'all? I don't understand. So first of all, we got an expectation that there is a dialect and a form of language that they would be speaking, they're Galilean. And then it says in verse 8, and how is it that we each hear them, meaning the disciples, in our own language to which we were born? And then it lists the different geographic groups. And the word language in there, see if I can find the reference. I got to find verse 8. I'm not very good at this. 2, 7, or 8. They say that word language can also be interpreted as dialect, which would be a subgroup.
Okay, so let's say the 5 of you from our 5 different countries, right? And then I'm speaking and you're hearing it in your own language. Is that what it's saying? So does that mean,
well,
I don't know, maybe I'm looking too much into it. Is it to where I'm talking and by the power of the Holy Spirit is being translated into the language that you all speak? Is that how it's meant to be?
And that would be an interesting thing to look at. It says in the end of 7, why are not all these who are speaking Galilean? So more than one person is speaking, and
Oh,
more than one language is being heard. So, but I take your point. That's an interesting point.
Either the people's ears are attuned to a language that isn't, that they're speaking in their Galilean dialect, but it's being heard in their
because
ears.
I can't imagine 12 different languages being translated at the, like you wouldn't get anywhere. Like it'd be just a whole bunch of mumble jumble. So that's how I read it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's nothing said about that.
Right. And so it says they were all in
I mean,
one.
am I a lunatic? I mean, do you I don't
No,
know,
because
ask mom how that all, or my
yeah,
brother.
I mean, it is supposedly, and I don't see the number right here, but supposedly there were about 120 in the upper room. I'd have to go back and find the number.
Because that seems to be the only way I can make it work in my head.
Robin,
Because you
Robin,
don't, because
they all had earbuds.
he didn't want to be misunderstood, right? He wanted the accuracy of the word of God being spread to other people. So the only most accurate way I can think that would happen is if spiritually it was translated into their own language as it was being spoken. That's just me. That's
They
my
all had earbuds. Like at the
they had
United
Google
Nations.
Translate. They all had Google Translate and
Yeah.
all was good. All had the latest app.
Right. However God did it, all of them were able to hear in their own language
Yeah,
and to understand what was being said.
yeah.
Obviously a miracle.
Well, and,
That's
and
the only way I can get it.
well, and obviously you think about it when they talk about Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. You obviously have people coming from afar, and even he was able to get the Ethiopian eunuch. Now I've always assumed that was kind of Hebrew to Hebrew, language wise, but okay. I just find it interesting that one more layer of complexity and how interestingly God can work to make sure we all hear and understand.
Right. Right.
Is it, I mean, some of you guys have Bibles with a lot of analysis. That particular passage, what does it state? This is one of the X miracles performed during this blah blah era, or any clues like that?
Well, if you get down to 12, they all stood in amazement with perplexity, saying, "What does this mean?" After they say, "We're all hearing in our own tongues, speaking of the mighty deeds of God," all the way down through Jews, Cretans, and Arabs. So it's obviously a miracle is a good word for it, but it's obviously an outstanding event. Because Peter preaches after this, and I don't know if it's 3,000 or 5,000 people go, "Holy crap."
Just like that.
Yeah, just like that.
Mhm. Is that a translation?
That's a Billington translation.
That's in my translation. The Bob words.
There you go.
Okay.
I was looking for the numbers. I think it's between 3,000 and 5,000.
Yeah, my Bible doesn't have a commentary on that, but obviously a miracle is happening in order for them to all be able to understand, because the disciples were not educated and did not speak those languages on their own.
And at least in mine, it says, even though it's translated as language, it could be dialect, which means like Egypt, you have Egyptian Arabic and you have Arabic, formal, legal Arabic and, so it's people hearing even in their local.
Mike, my
Well-
little study Bible thing says, Christianity is not limited to any race or group of people. Christ offers salvation to all people without regard of nationality. Visitors in Jerusalem were surprised to hear the apostles and other believers speaking in languages other than their own languages, of their own nationalities, but they need not have been. God works all kinds of miracles to spread the good news, using many languages as he calls all kinds of people to become his followers, no matter what race, color, nationality, or language. God speaks to you. Are you listening? So,
Basically, it's an undoing of what happened at the Tower of Babel, where God confused all the languages so that they couldn't,
So they would disperse.
so they'd have to go away and they couldn't be as strong as they were, and they were trying to build a temple or trying to build something to get to heaven and whatever. So he confounded their languages and divided them up and made them all speak different languages so they couldn't talk to each other anymore. This is an undoing of that event.
these people literally spoke in languages.
Robin can probably stop recording.
Okay, there's something else in here. Hold on, let me find my book.
Okay.
So anyway, if you get curious,
Want me to stop it?
yeah,